Champion Chris Canty is here. And speaking of off, I think it's fair to say Drew Brees was a little bit off yesterday. Remember, the Chiefs had a 14-0 lead yesterday before Brees completed a pass. Let that settle down for a second. The Chiefs had a 14-0 lead before Drew completed a pass. He was 0 for 6 out of the gate. It's the first time in his career he's been 0 for 5 or worse out of the gate, coming back from those 11 fractured ribs. Add to the fact that when he was out, the Saints lose to the Eagles. The Packers overtake them for the one spot a week ago. Packers win Saturday, putting more pressure on the Saints Sunday. And you know what they say about pressure and pipes. Here's Drew Brees on getting back on the field after his 4-game absence.
Being able to throw the ball, good enough. And obviously that was kind of a ramp up, from call it late last week into early this week and throughout practice. I still have a little ways to go. I'll be honest, there's some things that I'm still kind of working on, but it is what it is.
Are you 100%?
No, but I'm on my way.
I think if anybody deserves the benefit of the doubt, Chris, from bouncing back from injury, it is Drew Brees. I don't think anybody in the history of the NFL has bounced back from an injury better than he has, eventually going from not being able to pick up a ball and throwing it a yard to winning the Super Bowl with the Saints. So I certainly believe he gets the benefit of the doubt. He says he's not 100%. It's his first one back. So essentially, what did you make of it against the quality of competition they faced yesterday?
Well, he was shaking the rust off. I mean, he hadn't played football in a month, so you knew that he wasn't going to be sharp. But it was important for the Saints to get him back out there on the field. So when people have the conversation about whether or not it was a mistake by Sean Payton and does Taysom Hill give them a better chance against the Chiefs, you probably could make that argument under the circumstances. But it's not just about beating the Chiefs in week 15. This is about the Saints gearing up for a playoff run, and you want to get Drew Brees a couple of games under his belt so that when he does get to postseason play, that your quarterback is ready to go, and he's going to be the Drew Brees that we've seen, the Drew Brees that's going to walk him into the Hall of Fame 5 years from whenever he decides to stop playing. But, I mean, in terms of watching the game yesterday, yeah, it was a little bit off in terms of his overall feel, but you can understand that because he's missed so much time.
No doubt. And you're playing the best team in the NFL, and that obviously has something to do with it as well. We're asking on the Dr. Pepper Twitter feed, who do you trust the most in the NFC playoffs? It almost feels like a trick question because everyone's got their flaws. We'll get Chris's answer here in a second, but you want to weigh in, be a part of the Keyshawn, J. Will, and Zubin Nation on the Dr. Pepper Twitter feed. ESPN Nation presented by Dr. Pepper. It's official. College football is back. So is your favorite Dr. Pepper-loving college football town. Fansville, head to a store near you to treat your inner college football fan to a nice cold 20-ounce Dr. Pepper today. Here's the way it stands in the NFC at the moment, and we'll just throw out the candidates, and it can be anybody. The Packers remain in that one spot, although Aaron Rodgers certainly wasn't happy with the way they played on Saturday. We'll get into that a little bit later. The Saints drop another one. They're at 10-4. They're the 2 seed. Seattle is at the 3 seed. The Washington football team, by virtue of obviously somebody having to win the NFC East and host the playoff games at 4. And then the shocking loss by the Rams, the amazing comeback by the Bucs. So the Rams are at 5. The Bucs are at 6. Arizona with a win over Jalen Hurts and the Birds. They stand at 7. So your thought, who do you trust most in the NFC? Those are the 7 that are in the mix at the moment.
I trust Seattle, especially if they have a home game to start postseason action. I know their defense was awful in the first half of the regular season, but in the last month and a half, they're trending in the right direction. Carlos Dunlap, the guy they made a midseason trade for, he's having an impact in terms of being able to pressure the opposing passers. And then, of course, Jamal Adams being an impact player on every level of that defense. I think they're moving in the right direction, and they're getting healthy at the right time. Rashard Penny back in action for them. They'll get Josh Gordon back down the stretch. So they'll add some more weapons for Russ to cook with, and we'll see. We know that Russell Wilson isn't going to be the guy that's going to be the reason they lose. And so you're just hoping that the defense, which has been the sore spot on this team, can continue to show the improvement that they have. That offense will show up to the party. It's just a question of whether or not the defense will. I think they will. And out of all of the teams in the NFC, I mean, they've all got their warts, but I feel like Seattle's the team I trust the most. I picked them coming into this season to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. There's no reason for me to back off that now, especially with them in the pole position in the NFC West.
Indeed. They're in the 3rd spot right now. They seem to have the edge over the Rams to win the division. Obviously, the Rams are the huge clunker yesterday. Keep in mind, Seattle started at 5-0, is the best start in franchise history. Then they hit the skids a little bit, as you fellas like to say. The quote-unquote second quarter of the season didn't go well. They were 1-3, but they've certainly bounced back. On the other side, we talked about it. Now, it may not have been indicative if you look at the final score yesterday between the Chiefs and the Saints, but this boggles the mind. Patrick Mahomes on the other side, 9-0 in his career against teams who entered the game with a top 5 scoring defense. If you're a casual fan, you probably think about Drew Brees and Kamara and Michael Thomas, who wasn't out there. But at the same token, the Saints defense, for those that aren't paying close attention, has been outstanding this year. And Mahomes had some struggles yesterday, but at times looked absolutely brilliant, staying perfect against the best defenses in the league in his short career.
Patrick Mahomes is so tough to defend just because he has the ability to extend plays, the second reaction plays. That's where he's surgical. Yesterday, he was 7 of 12 for 63 yards and 2 touchdowns on rollouts and scrambles. And when you saw the defense that the Saints were playing, they majored in a lot of cover 5, which is 2 deep, man under. You saw that Patrick Mahomes was able to elude that rush from the Saints at times, being able to get outside of the pocket on the perimeter of the defense. And he's going to put pressure on you that way because he can use his legs to pick up some yards, but he's also keeping his eyes downfield for the big play. And I think over the course of that game, that defense just wore down, especially guys on the back end, and that created just enough opportunities for Pat Mahomes and that Chiefs offense to put points on the board. That throw that Pat Mahomes made in the third quarter to Mecole Hardman in the back of the end zone, I don't know how he put that there. I mean, you're probably talking about him being the only quarterback that's capable of making that type of throw. It's unbelievable.
Real quick, just not to get too nerdy here, I want to bring up one point on Mahomes. You know, after the game, Le'Veon Bell said something that it just boggles the mind if you think about it. He said, he's better than I ever could have imagined, with Le'Veon obviously coming over from the Jets, watching him from afar, and then having the ability to see him up close and personal. That just strikes me because at the age of 25, now 26, you're in a situation where you look at him and say, got the Super Bowl, got the MVP, what more do you need to see? But then you actually bring a guy into the program from a program that is essentially the polar opposite, doesn't know how to win, is dysfunctional. You bring him right in, and the first thing he says is, even though I watch like every other fan, like Le'Veon Bell, he's amazing. He's more than I could have ever imagined, even though you imagine him to be as good as could be. That just really struck me. A guy coming in, obviously seeing his skill set, and then saying, whoa, tip of the iceberg. I had no idea this dude was like this. On the way, a win for the Jets that could lead, how could we possibly say this, to another decade of losing, killing them after their only win of the season. But it makes quite a bit of sense. We'll explain on the way. 30 for 30 podcast, only a matter of time until that happens. The biggest reason the Browns are in position to make the playoffs for the first time in almost 20 years is what?
I think it's the marriage between the run game and the pass game. And Kevin Stefanski has done a good job of figuring out what Baker Mayfield is good at and what he's not, and trying to put him in situations that accentuate his strengths. You look at what they did last night, being able to stay with the run game just enough to provide that balance and the threat that makes play action effective. Only 3.2 yards per carry between Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. But in those 22 attempts, you keep those linebackers honest, you keep those guys coming downhill, and then you're able to find those voids between the second and third levels of the defense. And Baker Mayfield was surgical last night, only 5 incompletions. And you got to give some love to his offensive line, too, because they kept him clean. Even with Hubbard going out, they still provided clean pockets for him. Only 1 quarterback hit in 37 dropbacks. So that's impressive that the offensive line could keep him that clean. But I think Baker Mayfield's understanding of what Kevin Stefanski wants to do and Kevin Stefanski's understanding of what his quarterback strengths are, that's what's leading the charge for this late season surge for the Browns.
They had 2 95-yard scoring drives, including when one was capped, Jarvis Landry turning around, popping up a 1, popping up a 3 to pay homage to Odell Beckham Jr. You saw that?
Isaac Yiadom for the Giants didn't like that too much. But, I mean, the Giants were shorthanded on the back end. They didn't have James Bradbury. So you knew that their defense would struggle, especially in pass coverage. What I was a little bit surprised was with the complexion of the game, because I thought that their head coach, Joe Judge, did some things to put even more pressure on a defense that was trying to support an offense with a backup quarterback.
Indeed, and Joe Judge did say, I don't regret any of the aggressive play calling that was made. He definitely seems like a guy that doesn't have a lot of regrets. He just does what he wants to do and moves forward. From the Browns standpoint, you know, Jay is our resident Giant fan, but he actually said all week long last week on the program that even though he's a ride-or-die Giants fan, that this is a bigger game for the Browns. It certainly turned out to be a bigger game considering where their aspirations are vis-a-vis the Giants. But Jay also said, and I was taken a little aback by that, as was Keyshawn, that he really believes the Browns can, ready for this, win the Super Bowl.
Ooh.
Win the Super Bowl. We've got all these things about snapping the playoff drought, getting to the 10-win mark for the first time since 2007. They haven't won the division in 28 years. That's also the longest drought. I mean, that was the AFC Central. It wasn't even called the North back then. I think the Steelers win tonight. They sort of pretty much put it out of reach on ESPN against the Bengals. Super Bowl, though, is that a little too much? I was a little bit taken aback by that.
Jay's putting a little too much on that one. You know, sometimes you have that overreaction Monday, but you're talking about a Browns defense that prior to this game gave up over 80 points in the 2 games that they played. So I think it's a little too early for Super Bowl talk, but it's definitely reasonable to expect this team to get into the postseason and potentially win a postseason game, which is a huge step for the Cleveland Browns program, for their new general manager, Andrew Berry, and their new head coach, and Kevin Stefanski.
It's amazing. Baker's 25, Garrett's 24, Andrew Berry, the GM, is 33, the head coach, Kevin Stefanski, is 38. All they do is build, implode, build, implode. Now it feels like they had a nice, young, great foundation to work with. Again, it stands to reason that even though the Browns have won 10 games already this season, and Chris, there's an extra playoff spot available in the AFC and the NFC this year. We got 7 teams making it. You would think, hey, a team gets to 10 wins when more teams than ever are making the NFL playoffs.
Yep.
That would be enough, but it is still not enough for the Browns. They can clinch a playoff berth next week with a win at the suddenly resurgent, on fire New York Jets, tongue planted firmly in cheek, and then they need losses by Baltimore, the Colts, or the Dolphins to get in. So they need a little bit of help from the opposition of those 3 teams. Biggest thing here is Baker is really, I mean, look, even in the Monday night loss, I thought he was great. He was great yesterday. You mentioned how efficient he was. Why are you believing in him? What's different about it?
Well, I think the timing of the passing game is there now. You know, with Baker Mayfield, some of the things that they were doing in the first half of the season, it just looked a little bit off. But now it feels like it's in sync. And I guess that should be a reasonable expectation that this is the time that they start clicking, given the season that we've had in the offseason. No OTAs, no mini camps, you know, modified training camp schedule. So, you know, you're trying to figure things out on the fly. And I think now is that time where they're hitting that sweet spot, and it's perfect for them because this is when you want to be playing your best football. You want to be going into the playoffs with a lot of momentum, and you can certainly say that about the Cleveland Browns and the way they're playing right now.
So you look at Stefanski last year at this time working with the Minnesota Vikings. You extract him from the Vikings, you put him on the Browns, and you look what's happened to the Vikings.